This is an EB5 Investment Voice Special Report Update. Welcome back, EB5 listener. Today is another special report. We gave you a special report earlier in the week, and we were saying that more information is coming out on a call on Friday the 13th, and now here we are. Mona, Rebecca, what is happening in the world of EB5?
Hi, Mark. Yes, well, Friday the 13th, there was a USCIS Investor Program Office, IPO, stakeholder engagement. Much anticipated, I have to say, because it was one of only two that the IPO are actually holding for this entire year.
Yeah, so this fiscal year, we've already went through one. So let's see what the other one would have to bring.
Yeah, it was a little under 50 minutes, a little disappointing initially until you dig in a lot deeper. Because initially it seemed to be that it was all about what's called the visa availability approach that USCIS have implemented. But once we actually re-listened to the whole recording, Rebecca, there was a lot of underlying information.
Yeah, so we're going to get into that in a bit. We're going to delve into these other issues that we've read a lot of blogs out there, as you said, that went into the visa availability approach. But to start, the speakers. So we had Sarah Kindle, who's the chief of IPO. What is IPO again? Is the Immigrant Investor Program Office that governs the EB5 program. And we had our lovely Mr. Charles Oppenheim, or as we know as Charlie, who's much mentioned on this podcast series. He is the chief of visa control for the Department of State.
Well, what was very interesting was that this is the very first time in all these years that we've actually had Charlie on a USCIS stakeholders meeting like this. So I know that everybody wants us to go into the main topic of visa availability, but before that, we want to address other areas. As Rebecca mentioned, we did look at some of the other blog pieces, and we haven't really seen these areas brought up. The first, Rebecca, was NOIT's, Notice of Intention to Terminate Regional Centers. So just as we discussed on one of our previous podcasts, the USCIS RC Compliance Police are out in full force, as there have been a number of NOITs or Notice of Intention to Terminate issued.
Yes.
And now we know the number. On that call, there was Miss Kendall had announced that they had issued almost 100 NOITs, NOITs, to RCs who had failed to file the I-924 compliance for 2019.
And they also confirmed for fiscal year 2019 that 70 RCs were actually terminated.
Do we expect to see any more terminations this year based on this call, Rebecca?
Oh, I can imagine, yes. We'll see a lot more noise and terminations in the next coming months.
Why?
What I found interesting is that USCIS on this call, so Sarah Kindle, did state that even if you did file an I-924A, they were issuing NOITs for failure to provide full information. So as we discussed previously on a past podcast, we did discuss that the forms were a lot more detailed. So this is not going to be a 1, 2, 3 job anymore, Mona. This is,
No, we were seeing. So some regional centers had actually forwarded the I-924 forms that they had filed, and they had left most of it blank.
Yes.
These are the type of regional centers which are going to expect to receive a NOIT. Interestingly also, and we heard this phrase several times throughout the whole stakeholders meeting. There was a failure. USCIS IPO will issue a NOIT for a failure to comply with quote unquote congressional intent. Rebecca, did you pick up on that statement later that that there was going to be technical assistance given to congressional leaders?
Oh, yes, we did. It was sneakily put in there, which I believe a lot of listeners may have missed because it was towards the end.
Well, the reason they may have missed what the IPO were actually referring to is they stated that they had been giving technical assistance to congressional leaders and mainly in assistance with bipartisan legislation. Now, we know that there's only one bipartisan legislation relating to integrity measures. And, of course, that is Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy's bill.
Yeah, which would be S2540, the EB5 Reform and Integrity Act of 2019, which was introduced in Congress on September 24th, 2019.
We actually have mentioned this few times on the podcast shows.
Yeah, so what we thought was some of the pertinent issues that came out during the call, and we're going to quote exactly from Ms. Kindle, that members of Congress have released bipartisan bills that would make strides to shore up the agency's authority to address fraud, misrepresentation, criminal misuse, and other nefarious concerns found in the EB5 caseload. So from what we saw earlier in the S254 bill was that some of this will also relate to threat to public safety or national security.
Yeah, Ms. Kendall also mentioned that some of these bills, I don't know why she said some, well, there's only one, of these bills propose to charge additional fees to the regional centres and to investors, which would be allocated to DHS for site visits. Again, this is the bill which was introduced by Senators Grassley and Leahy, which really does bring in draconian measures as far as raising the prices.
Yeah, so we do tell all our listeners to listen out for other podcasts that will have more updates about this in the future.
Rebecca, you may recall that over a year ago, when the IPO office first stated or first recorded that they were going to be bringing in new regulations relating to the increase of the minimum amount plus the TEA, at the same time, they were also supposed to be bringing in integrity measures. Then there was an announcement that they were going to bifurcate the two, and integrity measures would be brought in later. So in this stakeholders meeting, this quote from Ms. Kendall specifically refers to the integrity measures that they are expecting to be bringing in. And from this particular quote, I think we can assume that the integrity measures they are going to bring in are very much going to be mirrored from that bill, Senate Bill 2540.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. And so we do tell all our listeners to go ahead and listen in, because you will find more information in the future. So we have seen that there's a lot more reporting on fraud and abuse to USCIS.
That's what was specifically mentioned in the stakeholders meeting. Sarah Kindle did actually mention more than once, actually, that there's been a constant push to promote reporting of fraud and abuse in EB5.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to see more broad background checks that are becoming more commonplace for people associated with regional centers. And there is a dedicated page for reporting fraud and abuse on USCIS's website, which is www.uscis.gov/report-fraud. So Mona, let's get into the much anticipated topic, visa availability approach, which we now know as VAA.
Well, we have discussed this previously, not only on the podcast, but also that we have a February 12th blog piece, which really goes into detail regarding this. But I feel like a lot could be said from Sarah Kendall, again, one of her quotes, when she said that the IPO is moving to an inventory management approach that will prioritize the processing of Form I-526 for visas that are immediately available or soon to be available, effective March 31st, 2020. And what this really is saying, which makes a lot of sense, that it really just affects China and perhaps Vietnam. She quoted currently there are 32,169 approved petitions for Chinese nationals currently waiting at the National Visa Center for visa availability. So imagine all of these projects which are out there, which have Chinese applicants. If you just take away the Chinese applicants, then of course it's going to be much faster to adjudicate these cases for people who are not from China.
Yeah, and we might actually see faster adjudication times to make sure a project is approvable at the time. Since
I agree. I don't think there's a might. I think there definitely is that. Because Charlie Oppenheim stated not once but twice in his responses that he's taken this very much into account, that they will be speeding up. Because he even states that he believes that India would be current soon.
Yeah, and he also stated that Vietnam and India will both benefit from this visa availability approach.
Well, how is that? How would they benefit?
Well, they're current in Chart B on the visa bulletin, whereas China is not. China is dated to December of 2015.
But if they're current, how do we know that USCIS will even look at their petition, because we know that Vietnam is backlogged?
Yeah, so what was also confirmed on the call, which was one of our questions previously, was that they are going to look at Chart B in order to move petitions along. So as far as India is concerned, and also Vietnam, no cases will be held in abeyance because they are current in Chart B. It just seems that the cases from China will be held back.
Right. They did. Sarah did say that she did consult the Department of State. Not she, but the IPO did consult the Department of State. But she really emphasized that this was a pure USCIS decision. And I feel like because of all the litigation and the backlogs, that really played a big part into this, because there's no change for the foreseeable future. It's not like she's saying we'll just do this for 6 months or 8 months.
Yeah. What I also found interesting is that we also have to note that a lot of investors out there, especially Chinese investors, are worried that, well, will this affect the unused visa? So at this time, China won't have to worry for about 12 to 18 months, which was quoted from Charlie Oppenheim. He did say that China will still see unused visas, as there is, as Mona mentioned earlier, 32,000 plus applications still in the National Visa Center.
Rebecca, did the IPO make any exceptions for expedited requests?
Well, they said the petitions with approved expedited requests will continue to be promptly assigned for adjudication, regardless of the petitioner's country of origin.
It's also important to note, as Sarah Kendall did emphasize this, that the priority date retention only applies to approved 526 cases.
So if an applicant can charge the immigrant visa to another country, for instance, like their spouses, then you should be able to get that by emailing the IPO.
So we're talking about cross-chargeability here, Rebecca, which we actually have brought up in one of our previous podcasts. Gosh, when you have 105 podcasts, then we've practically covered everything.
Yeah, it does. Yes, it does. Yeah, so don't worry for those who think you may not be able to get to the IPO. They still have their email address out there for those who can quickly email and send all the documentations related to the country of charge.
So we will continue to bring you updates whenever we have them, whenever we see them, because this is an area which is rapidly updating, and it seems like that the IPO and USCIS have woken up this year.
Well, thank you, Mona and Rebecca, for this EB5 special report. We'll be back in a few days for our normally scheduled program. We're going to be covering RFE trends. Until then, we'll see you next time.